Chicago public school teachers based on academic results for the kids. Quote, they don't know much about history, don't know much biology. But clearly they do have time to visit Venezuela and praise to the skies socialist thugs who destroyed a once vibrant culture. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the only show that sings to you while it keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the globe. Today, we're talking about how the LGBTQ are quietly changing norms in education. Plus, the New York University Gender Studies Department says, quote, milking cows is a form of sexual abuse. But we start with a group of Chicago union teachers who recently visited Venezuela, thanks to a crowdfunding campaign, and now they're praising socialism.
So the recent trip to Venezuela was by a group calling itself a Chicago Teachers Union delegation. And it's actually upset some of the union members and the expats who questioned the point of the tour, and they're taking issue with the group's praise of the Venezuelan government. There were actually 4 travelers who went down in a July trip down to Venezuela. They crowdfunded to get the money to be able to go. But the kicker is that they kept saying that they were part of the CTU, which is Chicago Teachers Union. They met with Venezuelan government officials and educators. They visited a commune. They were featured in the local media there. I mean, what a great trip.
So a bunch of Western apparatchiks, teachers, go down to a communist country. Then the communist government shows them only what they want them to see. We used to call these Potemkin villages, right? So I'm going to call these Potemkin schoolrooms, right? They take them to this communist country where there's death and starvation. You've actually got people digging up corpses in Venezuela to strip bones of any silver or gold that they can use to buy food. Literally, that's happening in Venezuela. But these idiot teachers didn't see that. They were shepherded around by communist organizers, shown only what they were meant to see. This is like when Sean Penn went and visited Hugo Chavez, right? Ridiculous. And they come back now talking about how wonderful Venezuela is and how we Americans ought to adopt their methods of government and their methods of education.
And Sarah Chambers, who's one of the teachers who went with it, she retweeted a post she put up down that said, while staying in #Venezuela, we didn't see a single homeless person. Venezuela, homeless person, okay? USA is the richest country in the world, yet there are homeless people everywhere. Over 17K CPS students are homeless. This is why at CTU Local 1 is fighting for fair housing. #CTU against Vez intervention.
Yeah, there are no homeless people in the 1/100th of the country she actually saw, right? That would be like sending the Russians sending Americans over here. Russians sending Russian agents over here to learn about American culture and only showing them Dover, Delaware, right?
Or just go to the Hamptons.
Or the Hamptons, right? Or only showing them some smug little community,
it's so great.
right?
It's wonderful.
And this is absolutely representative of America. Oh. The Russians aren't that stupid. Apparently, American school teachers are.
At least 4 of them are, the 4 who went.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and the thing is, they claimed over and over on Twitter, the CTU actually retweeted different posts by them. They're all the heads at the CTU and then this delegation itself. They're trying to say, oh no, we crowdfunded. It wasn't technically part of the Chicago Teachers Union, but they're using the banner over and over. And that's where actual teachers within Chicago public schools who aren't part of this are getting upset. Karen Moody, she's an 18-year teacher, okay? She shared her story. She says, they had a resolution out about opposing the invasion of Venezuela back in March. She says both the resolution and this trip reflect the personal politics and worldview of CTU leadership and their inner circle, not the majority of rank-and-file teachers. And before you say, oh, she must be some right-wing conservative, she's like one of maybe 2 in the whole teachers union, she actually describes herself as being pretty far left. She says, but what I personally object to is not the word socialism, but the support of an extremist, anti-democratic, autocratic lunatic who rules by fear.
By definition, socialism is anti-democratic, honey.
Yeah, well, hey, she's on our side, on the side of like...
She's not on our side.
She's on the side of not lunacy.
Right.
Which is, applaud
but
to
again,
that is something.
How do you, and I've made this point many times, how do we argue that Bernie Sanders is the same socialist.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Correct.
How do
Okay.
I mean, she's the Bernie Sanders of this particular group. She's right to call out the extremism. She's right to call out the murderous thuggery of Venezuela. But she stops short of blaming it on the source. This is what happens when you never go full socialist. This is what happens. So, but I get your point. I mean, and certainly many of the rank and file teachers in Chicago schools find this problematic. But I ask you again, how is this not the logical conclusion of what the so-called sane socialists are pushing? What they want are the same conditions in America that gave rise to the cesspool that has become Venezuela. That's your problem. And you got these people, these 4 who went and came back, they're teaching American school kids. I mean, this is the Bill Ayers School of Elementary Education. And what I so dishonest about it. You can say nothing good about the United States. You think they'd come back from Venezuela and say, hey, I'm grateful to be an American. I'm grateful that we have all of these liberties and freedoms. I'm grateful that, barring mental illness, no one starves to death in the United States. No, they couldn't even do that. They're using Venezuela as a model we should adopt for social justice purposes.
It's exactly what they said. I just want to read this. That same Chambers lady, the one who went, she says, through major economic hardships, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro never closed a single public school or a single health clinic. This stands in stark contrast to our experience in Chicago, where Mayor Rahm Emanuel closed 50 public schools and several mental health clinics in a single year. That's what she was doing. She, like you said, she can't go and actually see what's happening.
And Hitler kept the trains running. There you
time.
go.
There. Oof. All right. Well, that makes sense then when we talk about this next story about how LGBTQ is quietly changing norms in education itself. And I would like to say I disagree that it's quietly at this point.
Yeah,
it's loud and
out of the closet. It is loud. Yep.
So
and
they're
very flamboyant.
Yes, they're loud and proud. Well, a column was written in the Daily Signal by Dennis Prager, who you may know as a radio host, commentator, but also the founder of PragerU, Prager University. So he did a commentary on the dismantling of women's sports. He talked about biological differences in male and female, what's happening. He talked about our children's innocence and parental authority, basically how reality is being changed and what the educational norms and how those are being changed.
Yeah, LGBTQ activists, radical activists, who even many moderate Democrats would see as radical, just like the Chicago Teachers Union sees these radical supporters of Venezuela as radical socialists. These are radical sexuality activists who are giving unprecedented and unmonitored control over our kids' public schools. They have access. They're changing the textbooks. They're bullying teachers into a show we did earlier in the week, right, where one lesbian activist made the argument that the job of teaching teachers is not education. It is to smash heteronormativity. Can you think of, with the exception of Planned Parenthood, who has been given the same kind of access, can you think of any other organization who we would simply open the doors and let into our publics? Can you imagine, again, the analogy as I use is, can you imagine the outrage if for whatever reason the NRA had this kind of access to your kid's school, teaching kids about gun ownership in kindergarten, telling pre-K kids, having little plastic guns for pre-K kids, and going through all sorts of gun training rituals and having all of this propaganda for guns. What's the difference? What possible educational reality does these organizations have that allows them this kind of unmonitored and unchecked access to our kids? This is allowing private organizations that aren't educational agencies into American public schools to change the minds of children without any consent or even knowledge on behalf of moms and dads. This absolutely is changing the culture through using our kids as hostages and brainwashing figures, kids who are being brainwashed in the schools, with no answer to this. There's no balance to any of this. There's no sanity behind it. There's nothing traditional we're allowed to teach with regards to these issues. It's all radical progressive from the LGBTQ crowd.
And what's been happening then is that when these private groups then come in, it brainwashes all the teachers,
right.
It brainwashes all the
Starts with
administration.
the teachers.
Yeah. And then it has gotten to the level now, as we've seen, I mean, how many past weeks now, how many times have we said, insert state name here is now required, mandated to teach LGBTQ history in every subject. It doesn't even matter. It's not history anymore. It's in any subject.
And again, we have failed dramatically to teach real history to our kids. They don't know any. But they're going to get a steady dose now of union history, of LGBTQ history. We're about 6 months away from mandating history courses that promote the values of socialism?
I don't even think we're that far away because, in like what Dennis Prager wrote here, he says, as a famous Soviet dissident joke put it, and it's not a joke anymore, it's true here, in the Soviet Union, the future is known. It's the past that is always changing. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have going on in America.
And what a great definition of university campuses as well.
So I just wanted to check with you here. You know, we're going into a new school year. What encouragement, I guess, can you give to parents about education system? What glimmer of hope, or what should they be looking for? Because they're going to see this on day one at their schools with the educational norms, what is happening, or how could they fight back? What could they do?
In the public schools at the local and state level, there's not much can do because this is all coming from outside. It's coming from federal mandates. Big money is flowing from the federal government into the local states and communities. All of these activist groups are being highly funded, whether by textbook companies or invited in by teachers. We've seen dozens of stories where the school didn't even know that these activists were coming in. We had a big story on Idaho 6 months ago about how all of these activist groups completely circumvented the state school board to get into the schools. In a situation like this, there's nothing you can do. All I can tell you, Mom and Dad, is you've got media, you've got more transparency, you've got more ways of reporting this now, more shows like this that can, well, we're the only show really dedicated to this, but you can learn it here. The question is not what you can do to fix the problem. What are your alternatives to get around it? And you live in America. You have homeschooling, you've got private schooling, you have all sorts of ways you can avoid this kind of stuff in the schools if you're willing to commit to it.
All right, well, moving on, we actually have a sort of positive story. We have a former California teacher who is saying that the unions, teachers' unions, we were just talking about the Chicago Teachers Union. She says in California, the unions are the root of the progressive sex education. It's, again, she's a former California school teacher. That's why she can speak out. Rebecca Friedrichs said the teachers' unions in California are at the root of children's exposure to progressive ideology. She taught in the California school system for 28 years, K through 4 in North Orange County. And then in 2018, she didn't retire, she resigned because she just basically said, I can't do this anymore. After 24 years, she said it was simply impossible to fight the problems from within.
And that's why I have a hard time encouraging you. Keep in mind that Orange County, California was the one really serious red enclave in a sea of blue all throughout central and northern California, right? Maybe you had a little bit more in San Diego, but Orange County was the gold standard. She taught there. And you see what happened with the teachers union. And she's exactly right, Rebecca is, right? The teachers unions are driving how education professors teach education. The teachers unions and their demands for money and political correctness are a part of this, but we can't ignore the other part of this that works in tandem with the unions, which is all of this new pedagogy, all of the new national standards, the national testing, all of the hijacking of American public schools for the last 30 years, culminating in Common Core. You have, the one hand, you've got an out-of-control education bureaucracy who's forcing social justice education at the expense of real education, and then you've got greedy and irrelevant unions who are twisting the arms of teachers to conform rather than defending teachers like Rebecca who want to stand up against what the state and the feds are doing. So in other words, there is no encouragement here because you can't turn to your union for protection if you're not a progressive, and you certainly can't buck state and federal mandates. So what can you do? Nothing inside the system. Do what she did. Get out of the system, write a book and exposing it, and then encourage everybody else to homeschool your kids.
Yeah, and so the thing is, when you take a look at it, and we've done, I think, the same thing just across America, as parents see, they look at it, oh, it's the curriculum that's bad. But what she's making that argument, you make the 2 points, it's the curriculum and the teachers union, but we tend to focus just on the curriculum. Right. But she's saying, no, it starts with the teachers union. And it goes back to what we were talking about with the California Healthy Youth Act. It all stems there. Look, and that's all teachers union.
We know that from at least the 1960s, teachers unions have been corrupt and bad, that they're not looking out for the students' welfare, and they're only using the teachers as props for more money and for more ideology. We know that. In fact, we've grown so used to the teachers union sucking as Americans, we don't even mention them anymore. What's new to the scene over the last 30, 40 years is how the federal government, in conjunction with state governments, have done the same thing to public school education from the legal and the administrative sense as the unions have done to the teachers. So now you've got a double whammy here. Again, you can't use the unions to complain about what the state's doing, and the state's not going to protect you from what the unions are doing, and it's all the same junk, right? All of this sociological, psychological development stuff, all of this radical sexuality, and you're inviting in these vendors, Planned Parenthood, the LGBTQ community, to completely transform all of this. And heaven help you if you're somebody like Rebecca who challenges this because there's no place for you in the school system. You get driven out of the schools.
This is a story a little near and dear to my heart because it involves cows. But, moo. But I'm offended by it. Mackenzie April, who is a student at college at Brockport with the State University of New York, she just wrote an article for Dissenting Voices, which is published and edited by the Women's and Gender Studies program at the college she attends. She's an intern there, I guess, in the department, and she says that milking cows is rape. Yes, yes. If you milk a cow, you are raping it. So the article is titled Readying the Rape Rack, Feminism and the Exploitation of Non-Human Reproductive Systems.
Well, I love that. The exploitation of non-human reproductive systems.
Yes, yes.
To exploit a child and to tear it to pieces in the womb is the height of feminism for idiots like this student, right? But now with cows, because apparently you're not asking permission to put your nasty old calloused hands on those udders. You're a farm girl. I'm
Yes.
not. I'm the farthest
City
thing.
boy.
I'm not even a
City
city
boy.
boy. I'm kind of
Oh, that's
something.
even worse.
I'm a lost boy.
Yeah, you have never grown up. Okay.
Right.
So,
But my question for you before you go on is, do they not milk dairy cows as a way of alleviating when milch cows, when they and low, it's because the burden of milk has to be relieved. Are you not doing the cows a service by milking them? Am I wrong about that?
no, but you know what? That doesn't matter.
It doesn't
Not
matter.
to matter to Mackenzie April, who in her introduction says, she's using first person, which you know it's going to be such a scientific
goody.
paper. In this paper, I will discuss the sexual exploitation of non-human bodies, specifically dairy cows. As a vegan and animal rights activist, I feel compelled to take this opportunity to share and maybe even enlighten fellow social justice advocates on feminist aspects of animal agriculture, an under-researched topic that many overlook and might not even consider relevant to feminist discourse.
I go back to what I said before, right? I mean, the argument here that ultimately she's getting to is we shouldn't be drinking milk at all, right?
This is true.
The story behind the story is we ought to stop all agriculture, all harvesting of any community outside of the vegan community.
Yes, and on top of that, the fact that you have to impregnate the cows, she feels like that's how women are viewed in society, and so she's making this
But what if
connection.
what if the little cow impregnation is done by rape? I mean, or incest or something like that. So that's the thing, right?
She actually says the sentence in here: dairy cows are forcibly impregnated or raped in order to constantly produce milk for humans to consume. Right. Okay, explain to me where the teat is on an almond, and then we can continue on.
Well, that's why we should all drink almond milk, right?
But
but pretty soon they'll get to raping almonds. They will. And cashew butter, right? Yeah. Nut butter. They're sooner or later these lunatics will get there, right?
And they won't be allowed to call it nut butter anymore.
No,
that's too toxic,
that's too masculine. Right.
Yeah, one of the quotes I enjoyed is that dairy cows begin their lives as vessels of reproduction as soon as they are assigned a sex.
Yes, because female calves aren't really female until some evil farmer in overalls calls you Bessie instead of Jeff.
There's Bessie.
Jeff the cow.
Jeff the steer. If they are male, they are slaughtered for veal or sold to cheap meat industries. Always cheap meat industries. If female, however, they will begin and end their lives in a figurative cage.
So in other words, better to be slaughtered as a man than to be milked as a woman. Is pretty much exactly.
I love how cage. They will undergo gestation periods repeatedly throughout their life until one day they are no longer able to survive a pregnancy and are then killed for meat. As a woman undergoes menopause, the similar way in which a cow does, she suffers the intangible loss of womanhood. She is a dairy cow, wanting her old life back, or maybe even some more.
Wait a second.
Yep.
According to all the authorities, there's no such thing as womanhood. That it's utterly subjective. Notice what they do. When her veganism cross paths with her gender studies, notice what happens. All of a sudden, when she's writing about veganism ultimately, notice what happens. Suddenly, male and female become absolute constructs. The womanhood and manhood become inalienably separate and diverse, discrete things, right?
And then it gets the best part. The difference is human beings are still valued after menopause as people, while a dairy cow is seen as useless and a useless item that takes up space and thus should be exterminated. Is the
It's not useless.
About extermination with this crowd?
You're right. It's the Holocaust, right? The cow Holocaust. This is, and it's not that cows have expended their usefulness. It's that at some point in a cow's life, it becomes food. In the same way that a chicken may lay eggs and eggs and eggs and eggs and eggs, right? Until the point that you want to eat the chicken. The whole thing here is just bizarre. Again, 5 years ago, you'd have thought stuff like this was utter satire. Now they take it incredibly serious.
What a joke.
Utter.
Nice job.
Utterly ridiculous.
It is utterly. But that's the thing. This is where I see this on a weekly basis, just not even talking dairy, but talking vegetables.
Right.
No one understands anymore where food comes from. They think it just magically appears, like unicorns.
And all these idiots touting sustainable food and organic this and that.
The people who I talk to, some people, many of our customers are great, but they get a little hostile with me. Is this local? Where is this from? It's from 5 miles down the road. Is that close enough? Because when they're in a local food market, they think it has to be within 5 miles, but they go to McDonald's, they go to any of these, even Whole Foods markets. Where is all that food coming from? I could go on, but I will
Yeah,
stop.
and really what this is, as we said the other day, this is fashion, right? It's fashionable to think this way. However, and the thing about fashion is 9 times out of 10, it's impractical, right? What makes something fashionable is its rarity or its uniqueness or its oddness. If fashion were about comfort and utility, there would be no such thing as fashion, right? So the latest fad here is this is the latest fad here, right? And forget the fact that even if you went to these models of farming, you couldn't feed the world. That's the point. We need fewer people in the world, right? So what we want here is shrinking populations of everyone and everything out of the vanity of what's fashionable to these idiots.
Time now for a new feature on the Dr. Duke Show, Looney Tunes Reviews. Every now and then, Dr. Duke will offer brief reviews of movies, TV shows, and cultural events, but with a twist. Looney Tunes Reviews starts with a satirical review from a stereotypical woke progressive wet blanket, followed by the real review from an actually sane and socially adjusted person who is responsibly employed and who does not smell like stale pot and toasted cheese. Today's Looney Tunes Review covers the movie The Professor and the Madman.
We have been attempting to make this dictionary for the last 20 years, and I submit that the extraordinary, the unconventional, Mr. Murray, is the solution and our salvation.
The task is gigantic.
And impossible.
There is a way. We'll ask them to read in search of the words that we want and get them to write the word on a slip of paper.
Sup, nerds? I'm Casey, and I majored in film studies and gaming back in the day. My favorite movies are Citizen Kane and The Boondock Saints. I'm currently applying for jobs as a quality control specialist in the cannabis industry. I support Marianne Williamson for president and find her uber hot even without having to drink the bong water. First of all, this is my review of The Professor and the Madman. The Professor and the Madman is a movie about the achievement of 2 white European cisgendered toxic men who were both instrumental in creating the Oxford English Dictionary, that monument to the language of colonialism and racial oppression. If there were any social justice in the world, or here in Mom's basement, we wouldn't be celebrating the OAD, we'd be burning it, along with other icons of white privilege, including free speech and fathers who continually threaten their 45-year-old sons with demands for rent. Get a life, Dad! One of those men is played by Mel Gibson, a religious fanatic and Christian nationalist who actually believes that Jesus existed. Dude, read a book. The other lead actor is Sean Penn, who hates Donald Trump, idolizes murderous South American dictators, and correctly thinks that artists and journalists have more freedom under communist rule than they do in the Trumpenführer's first American Boobreich. We'll call that a wash. The only meaningful female character in the whole movie is a woman whose husband was murdered by the Sean Penn character, but who eventually falls in love with him. Totally misogynistic. I give this movie 1 blunt out of 5 and find it totally unworthy of the munchies.
My entire life, all that I pursued
has been in preparation for this.
You think I'm insane?
You do experience yourself as being under threat.
I only need books.
Our gathering so far, we've only just started.
William Minor will be struck from all acknowledgements.
What are you so afraid of? That the bad man can be redeemed?
Here's Dr. Duke's actual take on the movie.
The Professor and the Madman follows the true story of Scottish professor James Murray, who was charged with compiling the Oxford English Dictionary, and an American named William Minor, who was one of its greatest contributors, despite being institutionalized in an asylum for mental illness. Murray, played by Mel Gibson, was an innately gifted amateur linguist and philologist who had a brilliant mind for languages and the origins of words. His humility and self-taught non-academic background also serve as a foil for the stuffy, arrogant professors who can't quite figure out on their own how to catalog every word in the history of the English language. Murray eventually takes on the job, succeeding where the pretentious academics failed. Murray sought help for his monumental task by inviting the public at large to send him examples of various words, modern and archaic, and their derivations. One of the most valuable volunteers was Dr. William Minor, played by Sean Penn, who provided more than 10,000 entries for the dictionary from his room in the Broadmoor Criminal Lunatic Asylum, a maximum security hospital for the criminally insane located to the south of West London. Over the course of the movie, the two men grow closer together as they create the greatest dictionary in the history of the world. Although not a great film, an everlasting film, the movie nevertheless teaches some really valuable lessons with grace and charm. Major themes include the idea that knowledge and its codification belongs to all of us, not just to the intellectual elite, the importance of amateurs and the self-taught in education, the redemptive powers of learning, and the idea that higher knowledge always requires sacrifice. Really important lessons for today. It is also a satisfying and accurate satire about the foppery and pretension of college professors and academics. A satire that rings as true today as it did 150 years ago. With two compelling performances from Gibson and Penn, The Professor and the Madman is worth a look. It's a nice intellectual break from Hollywood superheroes and woke feminist odysseys.
An American and a Scot. One Oxford, one Yale, one brilliant, one mad.
But which is which?
Mr. Murray, we are watching with a concerned eye.
Watch then, and be amazed.
And that's going to wrap things up in somewhat of a bow. As always, please share this episode and subscribe to the free audio podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, and everywhere else. Just visit drdukeshow.com and click on any of the platforms on the top of the screen to subscribe for free.
And that does it for us this week. We'll be back Monday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time for yet another new episode of The Dr. Duke Show. Thank you for making this a great launch week for our new daily format. Please keep sharing the episodes with your friends. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. And until next time, stay educated, my friends.